her kid is a conspiracy theorist because she doesn't like the way math is being, under Common Core, is being implemented in her kid's classroom. All right? And I think that's going to, again, have a backlash. And I'll end with this, is that, even though, again, a lot of folks in the Democratic Party, independents, are also against Common Core, but especially within the Republican Party, I think there has been this viewpoint amongst many of the leaders of the Republican Party that Common Core is a good thing, business supports it, like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and all these big business associations support it, so therefore we need to be on board with it. And so therefore, as grassroots Republicans, all of you should be on board with it too. I would mention that even amongst the establishment, however, the Republican National Committee, for example, actually last year passed a resolution opposing Common Core. So in 2013, the RNC adopted this resolution. They said, resolve. The Republican National Committee, as stated in the 2012 Republican Party platform, does not believe in a one-size-fits-all approach to education and supports providing broad education choices to parents and children at the state and local level. And they say that it be further resolved that the Republican National Committee recognizes Common Core for what it is, an inappropriate overreach to standardize and control the education of our children so they will conform to a preconceived view of norms. Thank you. And that's absolutely right. They got it right. That's exactly the problem. And so therefore, I'm very happy that on a rainy day here in Susanville, that all of you decided to come out to hear a little bit about Common Core. Hope that you buy a book, just $5. Great stocking stuffer early for Christmas. But anyway, I appreciate all your attention, and thank you again to the Tea Party patrons for inviting me here. And I'll be happy to take questions. Thanks again.
I'm going to pass this hat around. He doesn't charge a speaking fee, but if you put a few dollars in this hat with the stars on the bottom, to offset his travel costs, I'll pass it around.
Oh, I appreciate that. I am not a circuit riding minister. So, anyway, thank you.
Why is California just now writing the curriculum?
Well, the question is, why is California just now writing the curriculum? Well, I think that what it is that a lot of this is taking a while to coalesce. The Common Core was adopted, as I say, back in 2010. Again, by many states before it was the standards were even settled. And so, again, the curriculum that has to be aligned with those standards, it takes a little while to then come out. And so that's, again, what we're seeing right now. I mean, for example, the testing system. All right? For those of you who have had kids in school recently, you know that under California's previous state testing system, we had the STAR test, right? Everybody knows that, especially in the newspapers. Come the summertime, the STAR scores would come out, and we'd all figure out how our local schools did, or didn't do. And, but California has decided, remember, the STAR test has been an excellent examination, I think, in terms of pinpointing the deficiencies in a lot of our schools. The Common Core aligned testing system that these federally supported consortia that I was talking about is not finished yet. Like the testing system is not finished. All right, the Common Core is being implemented, but the testing system is not finished. So therefore, what do? Right? So what the U.S. Department of Education has impressed upon states is that even though we're switching over to these new Common Core standards and new curriculum, we want you to use your old state-based tests, okay? Because the federally supported tests are not ready. Now, what California, though, has decided to do is to not have any testing at all this year. Right? So instead of continuing the old STAR exams, as even the U.S. Department of Education wants, we have actually decided in this just finished school year not to do any kind of testing. So therefore, what that means is that we're going to have this hole in our research about how well California schools are doing, right? We'll have all this STAR data up till the 2013-14 school year, and then nothing, right? What they're doing is they're field testing some exams that have not yet been approved under these federal consortia. They're field testing some of these exams, but they're not giving them to every student, right? So if you don't give them to every student, they're not valid as a way to judge what all students and all schools are doing. So therefore, and again, these tests again, because they're in a trial basis right now, have not been validated in terms of how they work. And so therefore, we just got this big goose egg this year. Now, the other thing about testing, and I don't want to go too much on about this, but the other thing about testing is that there's a different way that they're going to test the kids, right? And so therefore, all the kids now are going to have to, so all the kids are going to have to take their standardized test aligned with Common Core next year when it comes out. They'll have to take it all on computers, right? No more fill in the bubble and all that sort of thing. They actually will have to take it on computers. Well, what's the problem with that? Right? Well, one of the problems is not all schools have computers. At least enough computers so that the kids can basically all take the test around the same time, right? If you only have a few computers at your school, right, and you have a fair number of students, right, how are you going to try and get all of those students to take all of those exams, using the few computers that you might have? That's one of the reasons why the cost that I talked about, those billions of dollars, add up. Because you're going to have to pay for new hardware for all of those students. Because one of the problems is that if you allow students to take the same exam over, let's say, a couple-month period because you don't have enough computers, what does that do? It causes huge potentiality for cheating, right? And so therefore, it's like you have very little confidence that there's going to be the adequate security to ensure the validity of those results when they come out. Because, kids talk. And so, just like they don't talk about math and cooperative learning teams, And so therefore, again, you're going to, so California is going to have to spend lots of, in fact, I mentioned that the Association of California School Administrators said that we're going to have to have several billion more dollars for various costs associated with Common Core, and part of that is for hardware, like these computers. All right. Now, again, as I say, is it a coincidence that Bill Gates supports Common Core? I'm not saying. Just posing that question. All right. Posing the question. So, I think there's a question here and on the right over here.
Yeah. So I actually have several questions. Well, one is, or just a comment basically, I think that all this stuff about the one-size-fits-all really is the idea of fairness, that they want to have a kid in Oakland or in Susanville or Dallas, Texas, to all get the same education, which really only means because kids don't learn at the same rates, that we're lowering the bar, we're trying to create institutionalized mediocrity, if you will. And another question I have is about, I have a lot of stuff that I've collected and kind of looking up Common Core. And one, here's a quote here from a guy, David Pook, who's a Granite State College professor who helped write this stuff. And he says, the reason why I helped write the standards and the reason why I'm here today is that as a white male in society, I've given a lot of privilege that I didn't earn.
Yes, yeah, I've seen that video.
So there's a lot of stuff that gets into global warming, the list can go on and on and on.
That is exactly
And in
right.
a group discussion,
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, it's brainwashing as far as I'm
No, I agree. And there's like a huge potentiality for that. For those of you who didn't hear what he said, he was talking about the potentiality for basically political indoctrination using some of the aspects of Common Core, and I think that's right. I think let me go to your first point though about kind of this communal way of learning and teaching, right? This is basically the Hillary Clinton it takes a village style of learning, right? So what is team or cooperative or collaborative learning force on kids? It's not the individualism that all of us admire with regard to freedom, liberty, what the founding fathers fought and died for, right? Now what we see is this totally different left-wing emphasis on communalism, and you can't allow certain kids to do extremely well because that makes the other kids who aren't doing as well feel bad.
Right.
So basically what you do is you enforce, a lowest common denominator, but you do it in a way that seems touchy-feely by saying we're going to do it all in teams, right? And so therefore, because we have team sports, right? We have football and baseball, so we're going to learn by teams too. But what that really does is it undercuts the ability of individuals like Bryce and others, to be able to use their individual abilities to the best extent possible. And I think that is one of the currents in leftist educational theory, is to prevent individualism in the classroom and to promote a kind of one-size-fits-all, not just learning, but political indoctrination as well. And one of the things that, and I'll get to in just one second, one of the things that you will see in the English portion, I talk about math, but in English, one of the things that you're going to find in high school, for example, is that in high school literature classes, now instead of studying actual literature, like Mark Twain or whatever, you're actually half of the curriculum now is going to have to be devoted to non-fiction types of documents, like, for example, the Constitution, etc. Now, you know something? I mean, obviously, I like that in the sense that, I like studying the Constitution. But you know something? That's why you have social studies, right? Now, how would an English teacher, who has had no training in how to use some of these non-fiction documents, be able to teach them? Well, again, what you'll have to have is professional development and training for those teachers in order to be able to teach those parts of their English classes now. And so that's going to cost more money. And also, too, if you look at some of the advisories about the types of interpretations, for example, of the Constitution, you will see that the advisories will say that the Constitution is a living document. Basically, it's against when I worked for President Reagan in the Justice Department, and we were supporters of original intent of the framers of the Constitution. That's what we argued in court. That's exactly the opposite of what is being pushed in this interpretation of the Constitution under Common Core, that it's now a living document. So basically, it's whatever we want it to be. So, yes, you two, right? I'll go here, and then I'll go.
When you were talking about that math group problem, it sounds to me like that's an indoctrination of groups. And math is not a popular ball. Those two is four. I don't know how to try to do that. But my real question was, I've heard about this data mining issue, and it's not just trying to find out what level they're at. They are also collecting information, from what I understand, on their whole life.
Yes.
What their parents are doing,
Absolutely.
what their,
You're absolutely right. And I didn't get into the whole data mining aspect because, I figured somebody would ask the question about it. And I do it during the Q&A. Thank you for doing it. Yes, the question was, that for those of you who may not have heard it, is that what about the potential for data mining under Common Core? And that's one of the sub-themes, but it's a real problem with Common Core. One of my friends who in the anti-Common Core movement is a woman named Jane Robbins. For those of you who are, want to get material, good material about Common Core, all right, in order to argue with people in the education establishment, for example, who support Common Core. I would highly recommend that you look up my friend Jane Robbins, who is a senior fellow with the American Principles Project, okay, the American Principles Project, which is a think tank, and she is one of the nation's top experts on Common Core. And she actually, earlier this year, in April, actually testified to the Nevada legislature on Common Core and on the different negative impacts. But one huge part of her testimony, and for those of you who want to pull it up, she testified before the Nevada Legislative Committee on Education on April 22nd of 2014. Okay, April 22nd, 2014. And look up Jane Robbins, Robbins. Anyway, so a good part of her testimony was about this data sharing issue that you brought up. And, what she points out is that you often hear from supporters of Common Core that, no, all of this, worry about and concern about data mining is overblown, right? But what Jane Robbins said in her testimony is that, and the people who support Common Core will say, well, there are federal privacy protections, that are supposed to prevent all this information about your kids from entering into these massive databases. So this is what Jane said when she testified to legislators in Nevada. We are told not to worry about this because any sharing of data will supposedly comply with the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, FERPA. Right? Many of you have heard of the federal privacy law called FERPA. But as of January 2012, FERPA has been gutted and no longer protects our children's data from almost unlimited sharing, she says. Under the new regulatory interpretation, the U.S. Department of Education, and in fact, state departments of education, may disclose personally identifiable student data to literally anyone in the world as long as the disclosing agency uses the correct language to justify its actions. Furthermore, she says, and I hate to read people's testimony, but this is really important, okay? And so I'm going to quote her at length a few more paragraphs here. She says that the U.S. Department of Education is supporting a plethora of other programs that encourage states to build ever bigger and ever more useful data systems on students. It's funding something called Common Education Data Standards to help states develop a common vocabulary for their data, the better to enable interstate sharing. It's funding the, quote, digital passport, unquote, which will allow interstate sharing of data on students who move across state lines. It's funding the Assessment Interoperability Framework. Well, that's a mouthful. The Assessment Interoperability Framework to allow the transfer of assessment-related data across applications within a district, between a district and a state agency, and across state lines. So, her conclusion is, so although the federal government assures us that it is not building a de facto national student database, everything it is doing in the area of technology is designed to allow just that. So, we're in an era of big data, and even though the data on each individual student is supposed to be anonymous, right? There is no such thing as anonymous data anymore. And so, for example, even way back in 1999, 15 years ago, right, Kentucky had a data system that supposedly was anonymous in terms of the students were anonymous in this data system. But even back then, a researcher was able to, at random, basically take 2,000 student data samples and match it up exactly with the students who were attached to that piece of data. And so, and this was just a small sample, that 15 years ago. I mean, what is it like then today, the potential for that sort of thing? To me, it's pretty scary, this era of NSA spying and all this sort of thing. Who knows, right? And so I think that, and I've just mentioned some of the highlights of Jane Robbins' testimony. It's truly worthwhile to go and look at her entire testimony to the Nevada legislature on this topic, because it's hugely important. The curriculum, the testing, all that stuff I talked about is really important. Everything is really important. But as equally as important is the potentiality for this sharing of personal data that's not just necessarily about achievement outcomes, but it's about maybe the personal views, the personal affiliations, the religious, etc. of our children that will become part of huge databases. So I don't think that there is a good guarantee against that.
Nancy,
Yes.
what year did she testify?
She testified on April 22nd, 2014.
Thank you.
Okay? And so it was in front of the Nevada Legislative Committee on Education. And so I think there are two parts to her testimony, and you can download and print out both parts. One part is kind of an overview. I think she gives like an 8 to 10 point snapshot of all the major reasons why Common Core is hugely problematic. But then she spends, the second part of her testimony just on this issue of data sharing. And I think that's incredibly important, because I think that, again, those of us who are concerned with Common Core, not just about the classroom issues, but about issues like data sharing and the loss of anonymity. I mean, I think those are the kinds of things where we're accused of being conspiracy theorists. People will just say, well, how can that happen? You've got the Federal Privacy Act. How's that have helped us recently? Yes.
I wanted to follow up with what Jim Hodgson said about the curriculum in literature. When I was in high school, we were required to read Shakespeare, Faulkner, Steinbeck, Mark Twain, etc., etc. That was the best part of high school English for me. Now, those things are no longer available. How many high school students in the future will look for those books, will even know what those books are about? They'll be lost in our society.
Yeah, again, I absolutely agree with you, and so, it's a finite, time in a classroom is a finite time, right? I mean, as I mentioned with regard to Bryce, right? Time that you go over time, on math, is time not spent on science or English or other things. Also, too, if you say that we're going to spend half our time no longer on Mark Twain or Shakespeare or some of the other authors that you mentioned, but instead we're going to spend it on nonfiction works, well, that's simply time that you're not going to have for those works that, as a citizen of Western civilization, all of us should know about. And so I think that what you're going to see is, again, eventually, potential dumbing down of kids in the future. One of the things that binds us as a country is this commonality of knowledge that we have, about things such as Shakespeare or Mark Twain or whatever, and so it's, but instead, what we're going to have, I believe, is open political indoctrination, and that's what's going to take its place. You can make this highfalutin argument. We're a cowboy, have to use words like highfalutin, I never use that. But anyway, you have all these highfalutin notions about talking about the Constitution. But something, you go into many classrooms now, and you will see, look at the posters that are in many classrooms. It's not, there aren't posters of Ronald Reagan, right? There aren't posters of Shakespeare, right? There are posters of the pantheon of left-wing heroes, both political, and cultural in the classrooms. And now, you're going to give the opportunity for that to be given even greater force under Common Core. And I think that's a real problem. And I will say this too, because I was talking to some folks over there who brought on their grandchildren who is homeschooling, right? How does this affect homeschoolers or kids in private schools, right? You might think that, all right, these public schools are under Common Core. I'm going to take my kid out of public school and I'm going to send them to the local Catholic school, the local independent private school, or homeschool the child. And that's going to somehow prevent this infection of Common Core going through their heads. But it's more problematic than that. Why? Because one of the people who was the prime architects of the development of Common Core is a fellow named David Coleman. And David Coleman is who? He's the head of the College Board. And what does the College Board do? It produces the SAT, right? And so what he is doing is that SAT is now being aligned to Common Core, right? So now, even if you're a homeschooler, right, but you want your kid to get a high SAT score so that they can get into a good school someplace, right? All of a sudden you have this pressure on you to maybe, look at Common Core aligned curriculum in order to homeschool your kid, right? Because, I might not like Common Core, but, if my kid's going to do poorly on the SAT because I want to go a different way, then I don't want to jeopardize the future of my child with a poor score in the SAT. So now, that's why you're seeing a lot of private schools, who are like a number of different Catholic school systems, different dioceses around the country are adopting Common Core. Some of them are not, and have been very vociferous in opposing the use of Common Core. For example, I believe the Bishop of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, has been very vocal about not adopting Common Core. But again, it depends on the diocese, and so you have this pressure again. Because of these national examinations to go towards Common Core, even if you may have reservations about it. Yes?
Currently, is there any legislation to overturn this Common Core?
Not to my knowledge.
Here's your question.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, very sorry. She asked, is there any actual legislation in California to repeal Common Core, like what happened in Oklahoma, South Carolina, and Indiana. Or even, for example, hit the pause button. Some states have decided to not repeal, but hit the pause button. Or to step away from the testing, at least. Not to my knowledge. But I will say this. The fact, as you recall in my talk, I mentioned that that USC poll now shows that more Californians oppose Common Core than support Common Core by a significant margin. And that's not just all folks here in the Tea Party, right? These are folks across the ideological, philosophical spectrum. I think what that shows is that it is gaining, the anti-Common Core side is gaining momentum because people are becoming more aware, they're getting more knowledge, they're understanding what it actually means for their kids in the classroom, and they're having experiences like Bryce and others, and they're not liking it. And I think that eventually, even in California, you're going to have reverberations of that. And so what form that will take, I don't know, but I do think that it was, even a state like Indiana, where I mentioned it, the entire political spectrum was very much in favor of Common Core. The Republican governor, the Republican state superintendent of public instruction, a guy named Tony Bennett, huge fan of Common Core, and they thought he was unassailable. You know something? He was voted out of office by the Republican grassroots because he supported Common Core, and it was a shock, absolute shock to the political establishment in Indiana, and therefore that's why Governor Mike Pence in Indiana, then said that we need to look at Common Core and revisit it. So I think that there's potential, even in places like California. Yes. Let me go with Tom back there, and then I'll go ahead.
I was wondering with the grouping that you were speaking about, how can all of these hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of foreigners